Thank you, Evan. The curtain raiser does raise some questions. For instance, concerns of national security and economic competitiveness have led to a contest between states for technological leadership. How are these factors going to impact the activities of technology companies? What impact will the regulation have of these companies have on relations between nation states? On the panel will be Illinois Hickok, non-resident scholar, Technology and International Affairs Program, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace; Jonathan Lee, Director of Global Public Policy, WhatsApp; David Kirkpatrick, founder and editor-in-chief, Techonomy Media; and the moderator is Rahul Mathan, partner at Trilegal.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to what I think is the second last panel of what's already been a wonderful day at the Global Technology Summit that Carnegie organizes every year. Every year, this is the conference that I look forward to the most. And even though this year we can't all be present in the same room having conversations in the corridors, it's wonderful to have such a diverse panel of speakers from across the world. And nowhere is this more evident than in this panel. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a more global panel than the one that we have today. And we are going to be discussing, I guess, an issue that's particularly pertinent at the end of the first day of the conference. We're going to be discussing the future of technology. There couldn't be probably a better time than at the end of the year where a global pandemic, the kinds of which we haven't seen for a century, has forced us to rethink the way in which we work, the way in which we go about doing our daily activities, and therefore take to technology in a way that otherwise perhaps we would not have. But at the same time, this is a time in the world where the fault lines of technology have started to come to the fore. The challenges of big tech, the challenges that governments have to try and make sense of the new world that they're finding themselves in. Corporate houses, consumers, everyone's trying to figure out exactly what all these changes mean and where we're going to go from here. And so those are the sorts of things that we're going to try and unpack in the course of the next 50 minutes. We're going to cover a range of issues. And to kick us off, I thought I'd turn to Illinois Hickok. Illinois is, I've known Illinois for a long time, particularly from her time with CIS, the Center for Internet and Society, when she was in Bangalore. Illinois is now in Amsterdam, where she's an independent expert, still working on the intersection of technology and policy. And I was hoping, Illinois, that you could kick us off by sort of framing the issue. We're going to be discussing big tech, we're going to be discussing governments, just the whole concept of digital sovereignty. Could you frame those issues and try and give us, I guess the definition of the things that we're going to be discussing over the next 50 minutes?
Thanks, Rahul, and a thank you to Carnegie for the opportunity to participate in this panel. So in the panel summary, and like you said, Rahul, there were references both to efforts for sovereign control of the internet and for the regulation of big tech. Both of these are very big buckets, so I thought it could be useful to try to break down these terms a bit from my perspective, as well as underscore the importance of nuance for this discussion. And when we are talking about challenges, harms, and the way forward, as well as the importance of cooperation when we're looking for solutions and ways forward. So perhaps to start very broadly with this idea of digital sovereignty that we've heard a lot about, it can be seen as the right of a state to govern its digital infrastructure, technologies, and formulate policies thereof to serve its national interests. This has included moves that we've seen of nation states seeking to control networks, infrastructure, and data within their borders and of their citizens. Other terms that I've seen connected to this debate have included data sovereignty, technological sovereignty, and I think underpinning all of it are questions of security, commerce, and rights, and actors involved have included companies, governments, law enforcement, citizens, as well as in some contexts, communities. And I think different trends that have been connected to this idea of digital sovereignty have included a push for domestic infrastructure, national clouds, development of domestic technology, domestic capacity, national control of data, and the applicability of domestic legislation to the internet. At the same time, I think you see trends like increased surveillance, internet shutdowns, and removal of legitimate speech. And these have raised concerns about the move and the rise of digital authoritarianism and the suppression of rights. Now, kind of parking that there and moving on to big tech and the regulation of the same. Generally, I guess big tech could be understood as referring to the larger 5 US companies, Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook, and Microsoft. But I would just say that with questions being raised about the impact that these companies have on privacy, market power, free speech, democracy, and national security, it is useful to look at the challenges that are being articulated specific to the company and the solutions to those with precision. Treating these companies too broadly can result in regulatory uncertainty and can have unintended consequences such as harming individual freedom, disincentivizing smaller players, etc. I think that we've already seen this with different intermediary liability regimes that have been discussed. For example, regimes not making a distinction between different types of intermediaries, but having requirements that would really have to be carried out by a very specific type of intermediary. Similarly, it's not always very clear, like when you talk about how are we going to categorize big tech, how that will be done. Will it be done by user base? And if it is user base, how will that user base even be calculated? Will it be globally, from within a specific region, from a specific point of time, etc.? So the sovereignty discourse, as well as questions around regulating big tech, can be seen as a political reframing of the internet and related technologies by nation states with competing agendas and national interests, as well as what rights are to be accorded to those citizens. As this reframing happens, I think it is important that multiple visions for the internet are imagined, but they are tied together with the common thread of human rights. And in this way, I would underscore the importance of cooperation across the ecosystem, including citizens, government, civil society, and industry. The issues that face society today are very complex, heavily dependent on context, and require solutions at multiple levels and need cooperation between multiple actors. And I think there are a number of examples where this cooperation is happening, including in the cyber norm space, where there are a number of different initiatives coming together around this question of what is responsible behavior in cyberspace. Other initiatives like the Freedom Online Coalition brings together 32 governments working together to advance internet freedom through the development of shared language. I would also say that an emphasis on cooperation enables a balancing of interests that I think needs to happen, as well as opens up the toolbox through which solutions can be found. For example, I think there are also a number of spaces where norms and understandings of acceptable and non-acceptable behavior can be created, such as norms or understandings of personalization, acceptable forms of personalization online, and how users can understand and navigate such forms of personalization. So lastly, perhaps just to close, I would say cooperation is needed to develop a cohesive vision for the democratic governance of society in the digital age that is rights protecting and respecting. And I would think that finding these mechanisms and areas for cooperation should be a priority and a positive way forward.
Thanks, Eleanor. I mean, I like that framing that uses the theme of human rights to run through all the things that you discussed, and of course that is certainly an important way to look at it. I'm going to actually come back to you on the human rights question a little later on in the discussion, but I would like to turn to Minister Cina Lawson. Minister Lawson is the Minister of Digital Economy and Technology Transformation. I hope I've got that right, because I know that this is a designation that has only recently been changed, and it is in many ways symbolic of what the government of Togo is doing with regard to digital transformation. Minister Lawson, I really would like for you to focus your initial comments on precisely that. Togo is a small nation, but has taken great strides and steps to harness the benefit of technology. And could you perhaps share some of the things that you have done, or even that the country has done in this regard?
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. As of October 2020, I took on the digital transformation portfolio. And really, the reason of changing the name of my department was to emphasize on our needs and to modernize the administration. And it comes from an understanding that the weight of the state within the economy is quite important in West Africa. And so when you go about digitizing the public sector, what you're really doing is that you're digitizing the entire country. And so digital transformation for us is, we see it as critical to make our economies more resilient and also to be more inclusive as a country. So to give you a bit of a background, Togo is a small country. We said 8 million inhabitants, and has a mobile penetration rate of 81% in 2019, up from 67 only 4 years before that in 2015. And our internet penetration is around 63%. And 4 years ago, it was 13%. So we went from 13% within 4 years to 62%, which is to tell you the importance of digital transformation and how seriously we're taking on these issues. So if you look at what we want to do, it's never about the technology. What we want to do moving forward is few things. Number one, we want to ensure within the next couple of years that all of Togo has access to the internet. And we're talking about high-speed internet because when you're in 2020 or 2021, it's really about having mobile data. We're talking about 3G, 4G. Togo has launched in November a month ago, even 5G that we're testing. So we want to be at the forefront of innovation, but innovation with a purpose. And technology with a purpose, internet access with a purpose. So as a government, in terms of digital transformation, we have to face various situations. We have to face situations in some areas where people have access to mobile phones, but they don't have 3G. We have to be able to serve people who don't have access to the internet, but have access to phones and to connectivity. We also have to be able to serve people who have access to 3 to 4G and serve people who actually want to have 5G. So we are looking to solve all these issues at the same time, and we don't have the choice because that's the wealth of Togolese situation today. And so to be able to to solve and to reach out to the majority of the Togolese people, we need to ensure that everybody has mobile phones. And the way we look at it is that for us, in terms of digital transformation, we link access to the device, mobile phones, to access to having a biometric ID, like in India, when you deployed Aadhaar to the entire population. It's really our model in terms of giving people an identity, and also giving them a mobile banking account, And so for us, digital transformation is really about identifying our citizens and giving them ways to transact. We want to give them a mobile phone as a gateway into having access to all public services. We also want to be able to build on programs that enables direct support to our citizens, and we're talking about social protection programs. We're talking about, cash transfer. We'll talk about it a bit later when we talk about COVID, what we did in terms of COVID. We also want to make sure that our citizens have access to income-generating equipment. Today when you have a phone and you have a mobile wallet, it really gives you the means to have access to certain, new business models such as pay-as-you-go models. And we're talking about renting tractors. We have companies doing the equivalent of Uber for tractors in Togo, but also we have companies that retail solar equipment based on pay-as-you-go business models. So for us, digital transformation, it's really about all that. And of course, it raises questions and issues that and I guess that we'll come back to these issues, and such as, data privacy or cybersecurity, all this. But in terms of what we've been looking into, we've been looking at also changing our legal and regulatory framework to take these issues into account. So I'm very happy to say that we have a new regulatory framework in terms of data protection. We have a new regulatory framework for cybersecurity, and we also have a new regulatory framework for identification.
That's fabulous to hear, and I think I'm really glad that Togo is doing this in the right order. India did an identity program, Aadhaar, without a privacy law, and it looks like you've put the privacy law in place, and the digital identity program is coming. We still have to get our privacy law off the ground, but hopefully very soon. The thing that really struck me, and I'm sure it struck everyone, is this remarkable growth in connectivity. To grow that much in just 4 or 5 years is remarkable, and I know the impact that it has. And I think this is probably a good segue to Jonathan, who Jonathan heads policy in WhatsApp, and clearly, of the number of people who are now connecting in Togo, I have a sense that a good percentage of them are using WhatsApp to chat. But the problem with WhatsApp is, as a communications platform, as a messaging platform, what's built into WhatsApp is end-to-end encryption, and end-to-end encryption is as a concept deeply polarizing, in that there are those who say that it is absolutely essential for communication because private communication is necessary, and there's law enforcement that says that this allows criminals and people with ill intent to hide behind the end-to-end encryption. And at the risk of being provocative right up front, Jonathan, could I ask you to comment on that, and of course, just generally the benefits of end-to-end encryption?
Yes, absolutely, Rahul, and to the Carnegie Institute. Appreciate the chance to be here and speak with you all today. As Rahul mentioned, I help lead global public policy at WhatsApp. We are proud to be providing secure private messaging to over 2 billion users around the world, including over 400 million in India. And core to our mission in doing that is that we provide services that are simple, that are easy to use, that are reliable, that are able to be used even in low internet areas, including in many parts of India, and that they are secure. And we utilize a technology called end-to-end encryption to ensure the privacy and security of those messages. And end-to-end encryption is increasingly the standard when it comes to private online communications, not just WhatsApp, where we provided end-to-end encryption by default, essentially for all messages since 2016, but also Apple's iMessage, Signal, Google recently announcing its move to provide end-to-end encrypted messaging, Zoom as well. And it really is the way that people expect their messages will be protected. And as we're doing more online, so much of what we do online, not just in this time of COVID and the pandemic, but just in the modern digital era in which we live, we really believe that end-to-end encryption is fundamental to people's ability to communicate online. And what end-to-end encryption means, just for the layperson, it essentially means that only the sender and the recipient of a message can read it, and nobody else in between. And that includes WhatsApp or the service that's providing it. They cannot read the message. And we believe this is essential for a number of reasons. One is privacy. We believe that people should have the ability to communicate privately in the digital age, and end-to-end encryption enables that. Another is security. With end-to-end encryptions, people's messages are secure. Even if a hacker somehow gets a copy of the data that's in transit, it's encrypted. They can't read it, so they haven't really stolen it. And then, of course, there's also safety. End-to-end encryption, we believe, is vital to protecting vulnerable populations like journalists, activists, LGBTQI individuals, domestic violence survivors, people for whom, if their messages fell into the wrong hands, their physical safety would be in danger. And that's part of why we feel so strongly about protecting encryption, even as governments around the world increasingly pressure companies like WhatsApp, like Facebook, of which WhatsApp is a part, Apple, others, to undermine or break end-to-end encryption. And so we really need to recognize that the ability to provide end-to-end encryption is by no means assured. And this issue with governments and technology companies about end-to-end encryption goes back over 30 years to when this end-to-end encryption technology first became commercialized, and the advent of what some people colloquially call the crypto wars. And those fights have ebbed and flowed over that time, but they're really at a moment of uptick, with governments around the world calling on electronic communication providers to provide so-called backdoors that would break encryption to allow them to read certain messages. And historically, that pressure has come largely from countries like the US, the UK, and Australia, which are part of an intelligence sharing consortium known as the Five Eyes, along with Canada and New Zealand. But we've seen that pressure expand to other places, including the EU, where just today, the EU Council adopted a resolution on encryption calling for backdoor, or for at least the exploration of backdoor access. And also India. Over the past 2 years, India has been pressuring messaging companies, and specifically WhatsApp, to implement something that they call traceability, which would be the ability to trace who sent what to whom. And just 2 months ago, India, for the very first time, joined the Five Eyes countries in signing a letter, an open letter to technology companies calling on them to create encryption backdoors. And this, of course, is not even to mention countries like China, where mandatory government access to people's electronic communications is ubiquitous and is essentially the alternative model for how this modern digital age could play out. Now, the governments, as Rahul mentioned, make these arguments from the standpoint of public safety, pointing to things like child sexual abuse, terrorism, misinformation, and fake news, all incredibly important issues, and ones that we take extraordinarily seriously at WhatsApp. But we're firmly of the view that the best way to keep people safe from crimes like these, from abuse like this, is not to break the encryption that maintains their privacy, security, and safety, but to maintain it while utilizing information that we have access to work with governments to help keep people safe. And just a few examples of that at WhatsApp: we have a dedicated team that works with law enforcement around the world, including a dedicated team in India, to respond to lawful requests with the information that we do have access to. which can be very useful information, like certain forms of metadata that can help government investigations. We also have a dedicated trust and safety team that is able to use sophisticated machine learning tools and others to take action against accounts that may be abusing our service. We ban on the order of 2 million accounts per month for sending automated or bulk messages, on the order of 250,000 accounts per month for suspected sharing of child sexual abuse material. We're able to do all of that while maintaining an end-to-end encrypted service. And we also design our product very purposefully in ways that actually in some ways may hurt us from a commercial perspective in order to help keep people safe. That includes things like limiting virality by limiting the size of a group on WhatsApp and instituting forward limits that make it harder to spread information in a viral fashion. And also by having features like easy to access reporting and blocking capabilities and making fact-checking tools easy to access. And these are tools we're proud to offer. They're ones that not every online messaging tool service does. We hope that others will follow our lead in that respect. But at the end of the day, we fundamentally believe that end-to-end encryption helps keep people safe. And to break it with things like backdoors would make everyone less safe. And one other thought I'll put into the mix here, which may be of interest, is that we also think that in this time of increasing cyber threats from foreign nation states, governments really should be looking to tools like end-to-end encryption to increase cybersecurity and not to weaken it. And some call this world in which we live right now a quote-unquote zero trust network, in the sense that you have to assume that any network has the potential to be compromised. And we firmly believe, as do others who think about this, end-to-end encryption is a way to help protect against that. And so for all of these reasons, which I'd love to continue to talk about, we at WhatsApp really do think that this debate around privacy, safety, and security that end-to-end encryption provides is among the defining tech policy debates of our time. And again, I appreciate the chance to be here to talk about it with all of you.
Thanks, Jonathan. That really tees it up well for David. But just this tension between what governments want, the way Il and I framed it in the beginning, the human right of privacy, as well as just this whole the tension of technology enabling something as horrible as child sexual abuse is just such a difficult a thing to resolve. I'm going to turn to David. David has been following technology and the geopolitics of technology for a while. 10 years ago, he wrote a book called The Facebook Effect. But I'm not going to ask you, David, to talk about even Facebook in general, but just to dwell for a moment on just this whole issue of geopolitics that Jonathan brought up, the tension between what governments want, what new technology can enable, and what big and small technology companies want to do with to put it mildly, the power that they have in this world that depends so much on technology.
Thank you, Rahul, and it's great to be with all of you. So many wonderful and important issues, or not so wonderful in some cases, issues have been raised here, issues that are deeply challenging for modern society and nation states. The reality is we live in a digital society, and our world is still regulated as if we didn't. I think that's still a fundamental truth. Even example of that would be the Sustainable Development Goals, which barely mention digital connectivity, and now even the UN is really significantly changing the way it thinks about the digital society, and I applaud that. But the problem that we face, particularly with the contradiction between the vast power of a small number of global companies and the regulatory prerogatives of nation states, is one of the great challenges faced by modern society. Al Gore wrote an op-ed in yesterday's New York Times in which he compared climate change and that issue and one or two other issues as being of a similar stature for the world to resolve. And I don't think that's inappropriate. There is an analogy with climate change in that there are global regulatory challenges that are still fundamentally being addressed by individual nation states, which is fundamentally untenable. Meanwhile, though, each country is struggling, and I'd say dramatically struggling in almost every case right now, to find an appropriate regulatory regime to address the reality of the power of digital society generally, but specifically a small number of companies. And much as I respect WhatsApp, and I have believed Facebook and all these companies provide tremendous benefits to society, even what Jonathan was just talking about illustrates the challenge, because the question ultimately becomes, who gets to decide whether encryption is the right answer for society? Is it the country in which the communication is taking place, or is it a global transnational private company? Up to now, the answer has been the latter. And whether that is appropriate is being debated very aggressively. I mean, we've seen quite dramatic changes, particularly starting with the EU. But I thought it was quite notable just in the last week or so. The UK has begun a new process of creating a new regulatory authority, call it the Digital Markets Unit, in their Competition and Markets Authority, where one of the things they're intending to do, which is just being started, is to actually set out specific rules of the road for each company based on the unique characteristics of that company's business, which goes to one of the points Elena was making about how each of these companies is quite different. And then if they don't follow the rules that are described based on their unique responsibilities, potentially making them subject to penalties up to 10% of their global revenues. That is the world we're in, where an individual company thinks it can do that. So, the problem that we face then is how do nation states cooperate to do this collectively in order to make it more effective and unified and also fair to the companies themselves. I think that the position Minister Lawson has is also emblematic of a lot of very important changes that are happening in the world. All of a sudden, there are scores of countries that for the first time have ministers at the state level like Minister Lawson, and that is a dramatically positive development for the resolution of these issues. I think it will portend many good things as we go forward, well beyond digital transformation of the economy of Togo and countries like it. But another thing I just wanted to mention, and I know Rahul wanted me to mention before we move further, is when Snowden released his data about the U.S. security behavior vis-a-vis large tech companies more than a decade ago, that created a series of crises of a different sort that led to sort of a parallel set of challenges. So you have, on the one hand, this contradiction between the global companies and the nation states, and at the same time, we have deep distrust between the nation states themselves, particularly distrust of the United States. And at the same time, right now, just this morning, here I am in New York, there was an article that possibly Russia has declared cyber war on the United States, with a number of revelations that have emerged in the last few days about massive attacks on U.S. government agencies, etc. So we've got a kind of balkanization that is taking two different vectors of nation to nation in distrust, and also nation state versus giant global companies. These are difficult challenges. I don't see a near-term solution on the horizon, but to lay out the problem, that's it. And I would say, finally, that countries like India and the United States, because of their scale, really have a tremendous advantage in addressing these issues, and particularly addressing the large companies. And we've seen certainly the United States made a major move last week that would even break Jonathan's company off from its parent if it were to succeed, which I don't think it will, by the way. But countries like Togo are essentially buffeted by these nation state behaviors. And finally, I would say China really has done a better job than any other country, and that's worth noting, because it's been a technocratic country way longer than any other, a country effectively led by engineers. So it understood the threat the global internet presented, which is how it was able to build the Great Firewall and essentially maintain its control of speech, even as it let a digital economy flourish, which is just an interesting point worth noting. So thank you, Rahul. So much more to say, but great discussion.
No, this is, and we're seeing this with every speaker. There's just so much more to talk about on these topics. But I want to very quickly take this to Minister Lawson, because some of the things that you said actually, resonated just in the context of what does a nation that's new to this do? And Minister Lawson, we've got a question actually from the audience that I think I could just as easily post to you right now. Essentially, the question is, as you look to regulate these technologies, the evidence or the experience of the rest of the world has shown that if you regulate too early, you have the risk of stifling innovation. And obviously the corollary is if you regulate too hard, you run the risk of stifling innovation. And a young country like Togo, by young I mean young in technology, this is a very difficult challenge to face. And you've heard David talk about all the challenges with big tech. What would your ministry and your government think to do to balance this challenge and actually put in place appropriate regulation that can curb technology, but at the same time let it flourish?
So thank you. This is a quite hard question, because we look at it in a very pragmatic way. So, for example, you mentioned India and earlier, and because I was talking about biometric ID, and yes, in India, biometric ID was deployed, and then came data protection. But from our standpoint, it was important to do it before deploying biometric ID because we wanted to build trust. In our young nations, trust is of vital importance, especially when it comes to digital, and it comes to not only digital, but identifying people. We're talking about biometric ID. Without provisions for data protection, people would freak out, okay? So it was very important for us to say, guys, we want to do it, but one of the main reasons why it is important for us as a country to identify our people is that we want to put application on top of it, and one of which would be social protection, cash transfers to the poorest. So we want to show people that there are a lot of benefits into identifying people, citizens, but it should be done in a respectful manner. So that's number one. But in terms of how do you balance this, we also, and it's a process. It's really a process because, for example, right now, in terms of thinking of which technological solution we need to implement, is it important for us to go about using open source, or should we use proprietary technologies? If we have to use open source, do we have enough knowledge in-house or within the country to deploy our own solutions so that in the future we can adapt it better? Or should we go towards more resilient technologies? And how do we regulate that? What's the process? In the French, and you have various situations depending on where in Africa you are. For example, in the French-speaking world, we tend to regulate a lot more than in the English-speaking world. Where in the English-speaking world, people, in order to foster innovation, the process is more that companies do it first, and then you step back as government to see how things work, and you start regulating. And in the French-speaking world, it's a bit more different because we're always concerned about putting some kind of framework. How does that work? We don't know. We need to put a bit of a framework. So right now, there's a lot of internal debates as to how to do things. So we thought that it was going to be, even in terms of forcing it, the way we look within this department, the way we look at regulation is less about regulating companies than regulating ourselves as, the public sector. Companies, the main players in lots of the space that we talk about are the Facebook of this world. So the Facebook or Amazon or all the big five are very hard for us as a country to regulate. So what we want to do first is what is within our control, which is the public sector, the administration. So we should make sure that we digitize these guys first, and we look at the issues that it raises first from within our reach.
Thank you, Minister Lawson. David, I'm going to just flip this back to you because I couldn't help but feel rather pessimistic when you finished your opening remarks. Would you have some solutions as to how we can, make this better? Are there steps that countries like Togo, countries like India, countries like the United States could take, as well as big technology companies? And
Thanks,
no is not
Rahul.
an answer.
Well, like you, I'm an optimist, and I do think solutions can be found, but it is extraordinarily difficult. And it takes much more discussion at the global level than we have thus had in order to move forward. I'm sure even Jonathan would find it far more convenient if there was some kind of global body that he could talk to about these issues, which fundamentally there is not at the moment. So one thing that I think would tremendously advance the ball here, given the complexity of the challenges, is some kind of Paris Accord of the internet, in effect. A global, there's many aspects of it. Obviously, cybersecurity could be part of it. Regulation of the giant tech companies would certainly be a central part of it. And of course, there would be significant differences always between nation states, but there might be some common interests that could be articulated that could simplify the process of moving forward collectively. I think that's desperately needed. If we don't have that, and unfortunately we don't, we will see further balkanization of the internet itself. And one thing that I just want to briefly mention is after Snowden, there was an effort so strongly in reaction to that there was a serious risk that the naming system of the internet itself might fall apart. In other words, a parallel internet was being contemplated by certain countries like Brazil, Russia, China, etc., which would have been an economic disaster for the world. It was forestalled and avoided. But these are the kinds of risks we face if we don't resolve these issues.
A Paris Accord for the internet sounds fabulous. It's just who's going to bell the cat? Eleanor, I promised that I'd come back to you and speak a little bit more on human rights. And in the meantime, we've had a number of these human rights related points that have been brought up. How do you suggest that we run that thread of human rights through some of the things that that Jonathan spoke about, David spoke about, and Minister Lawson spoke about, just in terms of how do we use that human rights framing to reconsider the way we do regulation, reconsider the way tech companies plan their business and the rollout of their technologies. Any quick thoughts? I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to urge everyone to make it quick because we have a few questions as well that we'd like to cover.
Thanks, Rahul. And actually, very quickly, I wanted to touch on something that David said and what Minister Lawson said. And that's when, David, you talked about the tension of who gets to decide, right? Is it the government or is it the company? And I think hopefully we can find a solution and a framework that brings the user and the citizen into that decision-making matrix as well. And I think that really speaks to the trust that Minister Lawson was talking about and the need to develop trust in these frameworks, technologies, etc. On the question of how to operationalize human rights, I think a simple mechanism that can be adopted by both governments and companies is just the rollout of human rights impact assessments happening at the development of policies, at the procurement of technology that the government decides to roll out. As they're framing these, making sure that they're asking questions about what could be the impact on human rights? Are there certain mechanisms in place, transparency mechanisms, redress mechanisms, etc.? And on the other side, companies also asking those same questions as they design, develop, deploy, roll out these technologies and in different contexts. And hopefully that could be a mechanism towards creating a conversation to work through these very complex issues.
Thanks, Illinois. Jonathan, I'm going to turn to you and actually ask a similar question that I asked David. I mean, I need to see the good side of tech. David said I'm an optimist. I am. I can't end the panel without ending it on an optimistic note. But just before that, just so you can feed it into your question, in your answers as well, we've got a few questions that are quite clearly related to WhatsApp and therefore pointed to you. One question is, could you elaborate on how end-to-end encryption helps prevent against threats from foreign nation states? And then another question, there are three questions. I'll just give you one more question to try and feed in. The question is the collaboration between WhatsApp and law enforcement for data access, and I think the question is, rather than do this on a one-to-one basis, would it not be better to have some sort of global norms, which I think is along the lines of what David was saying as well, to have some set standards as to that all the countries of the world agree to with regard to these sorts of things. So Jonathan, over to you, and please do end by showing us how technology can be used for good, because I want to end this on a positive note.
Sure. Well, lots to unpack there. I'll try to do it in just a few minutes. One, I do want to associate myself with some of the comments that both all my co-panelists have made. To David's point about who gets to decide, and to Illinois' point about the importance of civil society, those are very much in our minds as well. And we do note that when we're dealing at WhatsApp and other companies with individual governments, the decisions they make actually affect the entire internet. So if we're talking with the Indian government about traceability, that's mandating traceability for the entire internet. If we're talking with a particular country about a backdoor, that's a backdoor on encryption for the entire service. And so having the debates on the national versus global scale is something that very much factors in our mind. And also ensuring that civil society voices are part of that discussion on encryption. That's particularly vital given the importance that it plays to privacy and civil liberties. And just having tech companies and governments having that debate is insufficient. We need the voices of civil society as part of it. Just to touch on some of the ways in which we do really put public good and helping society at the core of what we do at WhatsApp, and where frankly I think our global scale is an asset. One is just being able to operate our service reliably. That was frankly our most important mission during this COVID pandemic, was to ensure that people sending on the order of 100 billion messages a day are able to continue to do so when they're not able to talk to one another. Second is that we're able to work at a global level and also at a regional level to help connect people to important resources. We have a partnership with the World Health Organization to help give people access to information, authoritative information about the virus. We also have done that with health ministries around the world, over 100 such partnerships, including 16 in India at both the national and the state level. And then lastly, and there's so much more we could talk about on this, but I'll just point out is what we're doing to turn our tool into one that people can utilize for economic self-empowerment and entrepreneurship through features like the WhatsApp Small and Medium Business app that over 15 million plus small businesses in India use. New tools like catalogs and carts and things that we're really excited about that allow people to utilize messaging while still maintaining the the global reach and scale.
Thanks, Jonathan. We have 2 minutes left, and we actually have 2 questions left. So I'm just going to throw it out to the panelists, whoever wants to pick it up. The first question is, could you give could you reflect on the interesting contrast between how some countries, US, EU, and India, approach regulating big tech with China's recent fines on companies like Alibaba and Tencent. So I guess more generally, a question around just that approach to imposing fines, whether it's under GDPR or whether it's under competition. Minister Lawson, perhaps you could comment on this as a nation that's just about coming to terms with it. Illinois, perhaps, just from the framework of how do we answer these questions from a human rights perspective. Anyone wants to go first? Mic's open, and you have to do it in a minute because we'll have to wind up.
I'm not sure I heard the question. Is it about sanctioning the big tech companies?
Correct. It's on just the approach to regulation by using fines and the way in which different jurisdictions are thinking about it.
I think it has to be some kind of collective. I don't think that I think it's hard for a country like mine or lots of African countries, if they don't come together to be able to sanction big tech companies. But for me, it's even there are other issues that we haven't touched upon, which are, I'm a huge fan of WhatsApp, that's for sure, and I use it on a daily basis. But we do know that you have lots of fake news and content out there that does not help any positive cause. And so when we talk about civil society, we talk about sanctioning, we also have to talk about the ways, because Facebook could also, and other big tech companies could think about ways to improve education. What are you guys doing in terms of education? Because the way we largely we use these apps depends on our level of education. And so I think that a meaningful discussion on the on these issues should also include how we make sure that we can that users are sufficiently educated to understand the impact of what they read on this medium. I don't know the extent to which this has been touched upon, but for me, all these are really linked. I think that most of the time governments are upset because of the negative things that they can, the negative use of these platforms. So the discussion is not only about encryption, it's really about, WhatsApp for what? I mean, what do people use WhatsApp for?
Thank you, Minister Lawson. Thank you, everyone on the panel. We're out of time, but as you can see, it was clearly too little time for a topic that had so much more to talk about. Thank you, Minister Lawson. Thank you, Illinois, Jonathan, David. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And if you're on, stay on. I'm back in 5 minutes talking to Julie Brill on privacy.